In today's fight news, it looks like the beef between BMF champion Max Holloway and featherweight champion Ilia Topuria is heating up. As we mentioned in a previous episode, Topuria was on the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani, in which he made some comments about the newly crowned BMF champion, stating, "Without the BMF belt, I don't want him at all." The former featherweight champion, Holloway, clapped back at this statement while he was on an episode of the Jim Rome show, stating, "That's not a very BMF way to say it. A BMF wouldn't say, 'I'm not going to fight this guy unless.' That's kind of un-BMF." The former featherweight king also stated, "A BMF fights whoever, whenever. That's not the tone of a BMF." El Matador had a response on X saying, "The only thing questionable about me is whether I finish you by KO or submission. I just beat the guy that beat you not once, not twice, but 3 times. You now have the one thing that keeps you relevant, and that would grant you a money fight, the BMF belt. I no longer fight for money, but for legacy. Winning that belt while holding my title will cement me as the first to hold both belts, the first to knock out Volk, and what most certainly will happen when we fight, the first one to put you to sleep. Something to calm you down is this: God doesn't shame anyone. You will have a worthy defeat against a champion who will be remembered for eternity. I decide who, when, and where. If you don't like the terms, I'm sure Ortega will oblige." Holloway wasn't finished when he had this to say. "He beat a guy I couldn't figure out. He fought the guy once. I fought the guy 3 times, and I saw him say that slick stuff. Took him 9 minutes for what took me 90 minutes, and I couldn't do it. Something crazy like that. That's funny. Last time I checked, when I was your age, I already had title defenses, buddy. So it looks like you've still got some catching up to do." Rising star Renato Money Moicano made a comment on his YouTube channel when he was asked if he would fight Max Holloway. This was what he had to say. "I saw a lot of comments. People asking me, 'Do you want to fight Max Holloway?' Hell effing no, my brother. I'm good. Max Holloway would beat me up." Moicano also further elaborated on this statement when asked on X, "What do you do if Max does this to you in the octagon?" Talking about pointing to the center of the ring. In which Moicano responded, "I would fight Max Holloway if there was a rule about not punching." Per his X account, Ariel Helwani stated that it's very unlikely Alex Pereira fights in next month's Rio event, as he had been saying he wanted to do prior to 300. He said that the 300 main event, he came in with a broken toe, and he broke a second toe during the fight. Speaking of the light heavyweight champion, former champ Daniel Cormier said on an episode of the Good Guy Bad Guy show, "I always go, how's Pereira doing this? He can't wrestle, but he's got this singular skill set that is so good that it does not matter what he can't do." During an episode of the Fighter and the Kid podcast, former title challenger Chael Sonnen weighed in on the current light heavyweight champion, saying, "If he became champ, we're not out having a conversation on who the GOAT is. We will just refer to him as the GOAT." While speaking on an episode of the MMA Arcade podcast, former middleweight champion Robert Whittaker weighed in on Bo Nickal's UFC 300 performance. Bo Nickal did fine versus a dude that could kind of wrestle, kind of strike, and he didn't look as good as he has previously because he's been running through shoe-ins for him. It is what it is. I think he's got some work to do before he's ready to fight top 10 dudes. Another former middleweight champion, Michael Bisping, weighed in on Bo Nickal's performance and his future in the UFC. Bo Nickal has got the ability to be an American Khabib Nurmagomedov, and he's a great guy. He's phenomenal. He's undefeated. The UFC know what they have on their hands. While speaking to Canal Encarnada, former lightweight champion Charles "Do Bronx" Oliveira had this to say on his last-minute Darce choke that almost took out his opponent Arman Sarukian at UFC 300. 30 seconds left. It was tight. One of the submissions I liked the most, Darce choke. I thought he went out. That's why I had my tongue out, 3 rounds, 3 submissions locked in, and time ran out. It wasn't meant to be. In the Bantamweight division, former champion Pereira said this at the UFC 299 post-fight press conference about former flyweight champion Figueiredo. When Figueiredo moved up to the division, I called him out. So let's see what happens. Right now, they should be lining up to fight me. In other fight news, Diaz and Masvidal had another face-off in Los Angeles for their upcoming boxing match. At the press conference, journalist Danny Segura asked Masvidal if he ever plans on coming back to the UFC, in which he stated, "I'm definitely coming back to the UFC and get a W for my city, for my family, my kids, and everybody that believes in me. I have to go back to the UFC." Masvidal's opponent, Nate Diaz, had this to say about coming back to the UFC in hopes of fighting the welterweight champion Leon Edwards in a rematch. Coolest thing right now from the UFC is Leon Edwards. That's what I've got my sights on. I want to fight him. I like that fight right now. I think he's doing great. I think he's probably the best thing in the UFC right now. Edwards' future opponent, Bilal Muhammad, had this to say about the champ. "I hate his guts, downplaying my accomplishments and tell me I don't deserve it, I never earned. It's fueling me with hatred for this guy." Below is the UFC press release for the upcoming 302 event, headlined by lightweight champion Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier, and with the co-main being former middleweight champion Sean Strickland versus title challenger Paulo Costa. Per the UFC, it looks like Michel Pereira will have a new opponent for the UFC 301 as Mahmoud Muradov is out of the matchup and Ior Potieria is in. Potieria is actually scheduled to fight at UFC Saudi Arabia, but per the UFC website, if he can be medically cleared after his UFC 301 matchup with Michel Pereira, then he will still be on the UFC Saudi Arabia card. It looks like former UFC fan favorite Paige Vanzant has a fight booked through Misfit Boxing on May 15th against Elle Brooke. On the UFC X account, the official fight poster for UFC St. Louis on June 8th has dropped. This is the first time the UFC has gone to St. Louis in 13 years. On the St. Louis card, featherweights Jesse Butler and Brad Katana will be facing off. The headliners for the event will be heavyweight fan favorite Derek Lewis versus Brazilian standout Rodrigo Nascimento. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribe.